It's great to see so many people in the room, and I know we've got lots more people online. We're very happy to be back in Canberra, but before we kick off the Canberra event, I'd like to welcome Selena Walker to open our event with a welcome to country.
Thank you. Yuma, Galaganya Jelena Walker, Darawa Nuna Wo. Hello, my name is Selena Walker, and this is Ngunnawal Country. I'd like to first start by acknowledging my elders, the Ngunnawal elders, and pay respect to my elders past, present and future. I'd also like to acknowledge a recent passing of my grandmother, Auntie Agnes Shea, who was the most senior Ngunnawal elder here. She was a little old black woman, but she did get around, so I'm sure many of you crossed paths. If you did, you're one of the lucky ones. I'd also like to acknowledge any other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are with us here this afternoon. Welcome my brothers, sisters, aunts and uncles, and I'd like to extend that to all of our non-Indigenous friends that have joined us. Welcome. The Ngunnawal community are the traditional custodians of Canberra and the region. You may not be aware that the Ngunnawal nation is made up of several family groups and not just individuals who represent this country. Therefore, as a community, we have an elected body known as the United Ngunnawal Elders Council to represent us, along with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elected body of the ACT. It's important for you to understand and acknowledge, for our identity is a collective identity. There are other Indigenous and non-Indigenous people from around the nation, the country and the world who've come to live on Ngunnawal land. I'd like to acknowledge and welcome you all. The tradition of welcoming the people to country is a practice that was handed down by our ancestors, old people and elders from the beginning of time. Before entering another person's country, you would first announce your arrival and not enter until the traditional owner formally welcomed you. The reason for this practice was to protect your spirit whilst in another person's country and also to show respect for the country in which you're entering. It's wonderful to see that this practice is now recognised and respected. I suppose it's not like entering into someone's home unless you're first invited. The Ngunnawal people, as within all Aboriginal people, have a great heritage that we would like to share with all Australians from every walk of life. As you are aware, Canberra means meeting place, and Canberra has been a place of gathering for many Aboriginal tribes of Australia to come together to deal with important business and also for ceremonial purposes. Our Ngunnawal ancestors believed in the importance of people gathering to build relationships, share knowledge and to celebrate the gift of heritage and history. We believe it's important for all to recognise our unique history and again understanding that our land is our heritage and how loss of the lands has disconnected so many Aboriginal people from their spiritual links, cultural heritage and identity. Reconciliation is not just a word, it is an action, and it's a human rights movement. As an Aboriginal person in this country, I've only been counted as a human being for 57 years. Let me repeat that while that sinks in. I, as a beautiful black woman in Australia, have only been counted as a human being for 57 years. I'm only 43. We are very young in our reconciliation journey here in Australia, but we're on the right path. By incorporating proper cultural protocols like welcome to country, acknowledgement of country, smoking ceremonies, etc., we are on the road to true reconciliation. It does hurt me though that my dad was born a tree, that my grandmother was a mother in this country before she was a human being. So I ask you all to take a moment and think about how old you are, how old your children are, and how old your elders are, and what you're doing to contribute to that reconciliation human rights movement. The referendum that happened last year was another huge milestone in our reconciliation journey. Not the result that we wanted, but it did bring a lot of truth-telling. Helped us to identify where we have to focus our efforts and what states need the most amount of help. I'm very proud to be a Canberran and I'm proud of my fellow Canberrans for the yes vote here in the ACT. It's a demonstration that the work that my grandmother has done towards reconciliation can influence the change that we all want. Every time I mention referendum, I see heads go down, I see people get fidgety and uncomfortable. We've got to stop this. It's a shared history, so there's shared accountability. If we continue to live in shame here in Australia, we are never going to progress forward. I don't want my boys in 20, 30, 40 years' time to be standing up and fighting the same fights that I'm fighting today. So I encourage you all to continue to have those conversations. Have those awkward discussions where learning and understanding, which is what reconciliation really is, truly lies. It all lies in a conversation, a simple yarn. So thank you once again for inviting me here to the Welcome to Country. I unfortunately can't stay for the rest of the event. I do have 8 teenagers and I'll just stop there. But well done to the organisers. I'm glad we could put on some good weather for you. Enjoy the rest of the event, and I'll now finish in the words of my people, the Ngunnawal people. Yumalandi Yunanga Yerabu Yangu, which means you may leave footprints on our land now, or in other words, welcome to country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Selena, for that really heartfelt welcome to country. I'd like to acknowledge the connection that you and the Ngunnawal elders, past and present, have with this beautiful part of the country where I'm happy to work and to live and to raise my family. I'd like to extend that acknowledgement to the traditional custodians of the many lands of those of you who are joining us online. So a quick overview of how it's going to run today. So we'll begin with a keynote address from the Assistant Minister for the Public Service, the Honourable Patrick Gorman MP. Welcome, Minister. Then you'll have a chance to ask questions of the Minister and our other panel members. Wherever you are, you can submit your questions via Slido. So the QR code, yes, is on the screen now. You can scan it with your mobile phone or you can enter the URL into your browser. So to start things off officially today, it's my pleasure to invite the Assistant Minister, the Honourable Patrick Gorman MP, to deliver the keynote address.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Thank you for emceeing us today and for selecting all the easy questions on Slido. Thank you also to Selena Walker for welcoming us to her country. I too acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather, pay our collective respects to elders past, present and emerging, extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are with us today, who serve in the public service. And just to echo Selena's words, I thought that reconciliation is an action as part of a movement. I thought that was a really powerful way of thinking about the reconciliation journey that Australia continues to walk along today. I also acknowledge Dr. Gordon de Brouwer, the Australian Public Service Commissioner, Alison Frame, Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs, and Padma Raman, Executive Director of the Office for Women in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. And to our two officials in particular, I know this is an incredibly busy week for both of you with different responsibilities, so thank you for being with us. It really is a great pleasure to be with you for this roadshow. We launched last week in Perth. We had some 58 Australian public service agencies. Today, amongst you, represents some 79 public service agencies, along with hundreds who are joining us online across the country. And so a big hello to those who are joining us through the magic of technology. I'm going to take you a little bit back in time, and then we'll get to the present and then the future. The forerunners of the State of the Service report, which we frame this event around today, stretch all the way back to Federation. The first Public Service Commissioner, Mr. Duncan Clark, or DC McLaughlin, was appointed in May 1902 and served until his retirement in May 1916. He was renowned for having what were called startlingly frank accounts of life in the early days of the public service. They cover many of the things that we will probably talk about this afternoon: how to attract and retain talented staff, conditions of employment, integrity matters. But I'll read a little bit of one of his reports just to give you a flavour. He wrote, quote, "The Commonwealth Public Service must not be looked upon as an asylum for the indolent or the incompetent. Each officer will be expected to show evidence of strenuous official life, to work diligently and conscientiously and legitimately earn the salary he receives." A different time for many reasons in that. But he need not have fretted, because overwhelmingly, we all know in this room and online, the officers of the Australian Public Service have been committed and professional across that 124-year history. The service has supported governments to tackle the unique and recurring challenges our country has faced, from wars to economic downturns to pandemics and environmental crises. From early experiments with electronic data processing way back in the 1950s to considering now the risks and rewards of artificial intelligence. And as the world has changed and sped up, the Australian Public Service has changed its step as well. Now, to the state of the service. What do we see when we look within? We see an APS workforce that is greatly changed since that Federation era, where people who were once excluded from the public service are now critical to the service. A service which is richer for the skills and experiences of women, First Nations, culturally and linguistically diverse staff, and people with disability. We see service-wide bargaining, delivering solutions to workforce pressures and reforms to APS terms and conditions of employment, including an APS-wide approach to flexible work, significant improvements to parental leave, and improved conditions for a range of cohorts. We see agencies working hard to build the capabilities they need now and into the future. We're using strategic workforce planning to address and assess skills gaps, reducing reliance on consultants and contractors, and bringing people back into the core work of the Australian Public Service. We're participating in reviews to consider progress towards better outcomes and collaborating more across agencies, including on projects funded by the Capability Reinvestment Fund. There is, as there should be, a renewed focus on strengthening leadership and integrity across the service. System-wide improvements are underway to support a pro-integrity culture at every single level of the public service. And performance management of senior executives across the service now accords equal weighting to outcomes and behaviours. This sends a strong message that how things done is important to what we can achieve. And we see staff with a strong sense of purpose. The employee census tells us that more than 9 in 10, or 92%, agreed that they understand how their role contributes to achieving an outcome for the Australian public. And we also see a strong commitment across the service to achieving net zero within the APS by 2030, with a strategy that sets out practical actions to reduce emissions from government operations and a reinstatement for the first time in 10 years of the reporting of government emissions, showing that we are as accountable to the public as we expect corporations in the public to be accountable to us. And then what do we do when we look beyond the service as is today? What is the Australian Public Service doing to look over the horizon, to connect with partners in other sectors and those it serves? The Measuring What Matters framework is our first national wellbeing framework. 50 indicators tracking how we are faring across 5 domains: health, security, sustainability, cohesion and prosperity. This supports the continuing discussion which we're all a part of, and indeed part of what today is about, which is the type of society Australians want to live in and how this can be achieved, and the critical role for the public sector in delivering it. We're also using long-term insights briefings to examine specific policy challenges that affect Australia and the service in the medium and long term. The first of these was on the very easy, simple task of how artificial intelligence might affect public trust in the delivery of public services. These briefings on these actually very complex matters strengthen policy development and planning by ensuring the APS understand community views, look at the evidence, and then assess the implications of the above. The service is also looking at how mainstream services can be delivered more flexibly and how place-based approaches can complement universal safety nets. Many of you have been on the journey with us of recent years when it comes to APS reform. I won't go through now everything we've done in APS reform, but just to leave you with a little pointer of where the APS reform journey goes next. Integrity stays at the top. It is so important. The APS is a champion of integrity. We'll continue the work to ensure the Australian Public Service is outward-looking, finding the best ideas and the best ways to engage with the communities which we serve and regulate. And we will continue to invest in capability, recognising that an APS that has the capability to do its job well will ensure we have the right policy and services to serve the Australian people well now and into the future. I'll end on the ghosts of commissioners past. If DC McLaughlin was with us now, what would he make of this modern Australian public service? I think he would find there is much to admire, but still more to do. After all, This is the Commissioner who said in his 1906 report to public servants, quote, "We live in deeds, not years, in thoughts, not breaths." But it was this culture of action and ideas which was embedded in the public service in its earliest days. That idea is just as strong today. And it's in that spirit I thank each of you for your public service, and thank you for the work you do for the Australian people. I look forward to taking your easy and hard questions on Slido. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you for your time and for your thoughts getting us started today. So obviously today's session is part of the annual State of the Service Roadshow. It's a time to come together and to talk through ideas for the public service. The Roadshow showcases the key themes from the State of the Service report and the APS employee census. But importantly, it also allows us to engage directly with all of you, with APS staff across the country. It's time to celebrate the work that we do as public servants for Australia and to discuss the critical issues we need to consider for the service to continue to evolve and thrive. So before we turn to our panel, just a moment, get your questions ready. We want to take a moment just to highlight what some of our colleagues from across the service value most about working in the Australian public service.
Service is something that's near and dear to my heart, whether you're serving the country or serving your community.
I like knowing that I'm a part of something bigger than myself.
It's been a fantastic opportunity to see projects from start to finish.
I'm supported to have a working arrangement that is flexible as a working mother.
I get to work really closely with state and territory governments.
It grants me the opportunity to listen to our communities and get their feedback.
And when you hear a community group say, thank you for the work that you're doing, nothing compares to that. It's a really rewarding environment. You get to work with some inspiring people. It has given me a lot of opportunity which I never imagined possible.
So time for you all to get involved as we're going to move to our panel discussion. So I'll invite our panellists to join me on the stage. So a reminder, if you've got a question, please send it through Slido. We've popped the QR code back up again for those who missed it before or in case you've joined us a little late. Please keep an eye on what other people are asking in Slido, because if you see a question you like and you want to hear answered, you can vote that question up and it's more likely to make it through to those that we have time to ask today. So please join me in welcoming our panellists. Obviously the Assistant Minister for the Public Service, the Honourable Patrick Gorman, the Public Service Commissioner, Dr Gordon de Brouwer, the Secretary for the Department of Veterans Affairs, Alison Frayne, and the Executive Director for the Office for Women, Padma Raman. Thank you all for your time today. Before we get stuck into the questions, can I ask each of you to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about some highlights of what's brought you to this stage today to talk about this? So, First Minister.
I will start. But one of the things I always say when I'm talking, particularly to the community at large, about the public service is that you've always got to remember that the public service isn't something over there. It's our family, it's our friends and it's our neighbours, wherever you live in Australia. And so if I think about what that means for me, from my earliest years, my great-grandmother, who used to look after me while my parents were working as teachers, when I was a child, she worked at the Australian Tax Office. So she'd often tell me about her pride in delivering services to war widows like herself, getting the sort of pensions and support they needed. My wife started her career at Centrelink in Brisbane. Again, a great way to start a career. And for myself, I've primarily worked in the sort of policy advocacy side of things, but having worked in a range of different roles in Parliament House and in Australian politics, inevitably some of your best friends are people in the public service. And so I've got great admiration for the people of the service, but also a pretty high ambition for what we can do heading into the future.
Thanks. Padma?
Hello, I'm Padma Raman. So I started with the service in September last year. I have been a public servant for a long time, but never inside the beast, inside the machine. The Executive Director for the Office for Women is a newly created position, and it really goes to what this government wants to do with gender equality, which is to have gender equality embedded in all of our decision making, and when we think about public policy, making sure we're thinking about the impacts of public policy and decisions both on men and women and people of all genders.
Alison.
Hi, I'm Alison Frame. I've been the Secretary at DVA for just over 12 months now. I was appointed, commenced end of January last year. Prior to that, I was the Deputy Secretary for Social Policy and PM&C, and then had a range of social policy roles in the Commonwealth Government and New South Wales Government. And before that, had practiced for 5 years as an allied health professional, so had been engaged in direct service delivery myself before I joined the public service in 2000. For me, the real benefit, I'm so interested in these issues, everything we're going to talk about today in the state of the service, because my focus in my work has always been, in the public service, has always been on supporting staff to do the job that they're doing for the Australian public. And that's the approach I brought to everything when I was overseeing Centrelink offices in Sydney many years ago, and probably reflected my earlier service delivery experience itself. But I just always want to find out, what do staff need to do their job well? We're all serving the Australian public. What do people need to do that? And in equipping them to do that, then we obviously deliver higher quality services and can better serve the Australian people. So that's where my focus lies. Thank you.
And Gordon.
Yeah, hi, I'm Gordon de Brouwer. I'm the Australian Public Service Commissioner. I've been in and around the public service for almost 40 years. I've always loved that element of public service. I think it's really about the Australian people and our natural world, and what we can do as frankly servants of the public to protect and improve people's lives. Coming into the Commission, for me, is a way of, actually, I think the Commission's the steward of the service. So for me, it's a real honour to be able to be in that role of stewarding the service that my colleagues are talking about.
Okay, so I can see questions are starting to come through, but I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I'm sitting here to ask a few questions first and then kick off. So vote them up and down. Let me know which ones you really want to hear us talk about. But first of all, I want to ask you, Alison, I think you've had some recent engagement with the APS consultancy team that has been established and is mentioned in the State of the Service report. So what's your engagement with them been like, and what are you aware that they're doing?
So they came to meet with me. I thought it was excellent that they reached out and said, we want to come and talk to you and tell you about what we're delivering and what we want to achieve. So I got my whole exec team there, the deputies as well, for a pretty free-flowing conversation about where they were starting and where we thought DVA could help contribute to that. So it's reciprocal, how we could help them and how they might be able to help us. So I thought that was a really sensible approach on their part and offered a lot to us. We talked about strategic work we were doing that might tick the boxes for them in terms of where they might commence, because they're obviously looking for really strategic, those most strategic projects in the first instance. Also, we talked about secondment, so I'm quite keen to contemplate where some DVA staff might get a real benefit from being seconded into that team, getting additional experience and exposure and expertise that they can bring back to DVA. So we've just commenced that relationship, but I can see a lot of benefit for them and for us in continuing to develop that.
Okay. So one of the things that has come up in the questions already is that there are some, we've moved to publishing all the APS census results for all agencies. So we were on a journey, but now that's happening across the board. But we are seeing some agencies have quite high reported rates of bullying. So what are we doing to turn that around in those agencies? Do you want to kick off, Gordon, on that one?
Yeah, so thanks. So be really clear, bullying and harassment in the workplace is a completely unacceptable behaviour, so zero tolerance for it. I think very clear the government's commitment on this was transparency is the starting point. So being honest and open about what actually is the experience of people in their workplaces That's why all of that's now in this census, in this State of the Service report, all fully documented. And you can get to the digital version and you can look at the pages very directly. But transparency is the starting point. Transparency drives accountability. We've got two other, I think, structural features that help us deal with that. One is the capability reviews that have been instituted. They reveal behaviour and in organisations. And the government's commitment is that they're fully transparent and independent, so people can have confidence in that. The other is strengthening performance leadership and management systems, certainly starting with SES and being really clear that what you deliver, what you do matters, but your behaviour, how you deliver it, also matters and matters equally. That's now institutionalised more generally. That's the same for secretaries, and it's more generally through the service. So they're very powerful ways of leaning in both on institutions and on individuals, that what we expect of people.
And one of the top questions we're seeing come through is around the morale problems that some agencies have, not just large departments, but smaller agencies. As every organisation is unique and a little bit different. So those sort of transparency and accountability mechanisms, you see that as being sort of, and the leadership you mentioned as core drivers to changing that, to really making sure it gets the focus it deserves for the APS staff across the service.
That's right.
Can I say something on morale as well?
Yes, please.
I just wanted to say there's probably something quite specific to DVA, but it might be reflected in some other departments as well. I think there's a particular challenge when you're subject to a Royal Commission, for example, that is ongoing for a few years. That's very relentless scrutiny, day after day. And the stories that they feature obviously are not the positive ones. That's not to say that those ones don't happen in a vast instances of cases, but there are very negative experiences, and the Royal Commission exists for a very tragic reason as well. But I think that brings a really specific challenge around keeping morale high when staff feel that every day their efforts are being diminished or not, a real focus on those aspects that are not as successful. So that brings a challenge for us in leading and continuing to support staff. It comes back to that message that I had at the beginning about supporting staff to do their jobs, reminding them of how much their efforts are appreciated. Messages from the Public Service Commissioner and from the Minister and Prime Minister, all those messages that do come through make a difference as well. And to just remind staff that the reality of the situation means there is this ongoing public scrutiny, but it doesn't, and we always want to improve, but that doesn't mean that their efforts aren't massively appreciated and that we want to keep responding to what they tell us they need to do that job better as well.
Can I just, I guess from a bullying harassment point of view, we know that the rates of sexual harassment are high in Australia across workplaces, but thinking about what Respect at Work and the implementation of Respect at Work does is it introduces a positive duty for the first time on all employers to provide a workplace free of not just sexual harassment but sex discrimination as well. And I think that's a real game changer in terms of accountability, in terms of what we as leaders need to be thinking about in terms of providing a workplace that's free from sexual harassment and sex discrimination too.
So turning then to one of the aspects you mentioned, Minister, in your talk was the shift through the APS bargaining process, enterprise bargaining process, the removal of caps on the number of days someone can work flexibly and work from home. How do you see that changing the service?
Well, firstly, we have removed the caps, but I think it is worth equally saying we haven't removed the expectation that it is an agreement between employees and the agencies in which they work. I'm really conscious that there are some people who provide services and work that can only be done in person. And so when we think about that, we also recognise that some people would like to have some of those opportunities, but because of the nature of their work, and I was with a number of Border Force officials yesterday as we welcomed Prime Minister of Singapore and the Prime Minister of Indonesia for ASEAN. Their work can't be done, can't do that in your lounge room, or at an appropriate workplace health and safety recognised desk and setup. So we recognise it's different for different people. And we want this to be something where we get the best out of the public service rather than something that creates further tension within the public service. I'm really encouraged when I see it working well. I was at the National Disability Insurance Agency yesterday as well, and they were telling me about some of the experiences they have in getting their systems to work better for people who are working from home, getting the most out of their employees. And I think ultimately I'd just say to every public servant and every leader in the public service it's a journey we're on together. 5 years ago, it was very much something that was a bespoke arrangement for an individual with very specific needs or skills. Now it is becoming something that is much more common. We're all learning how to make it work. And I just encourage people where you've got success stories to share those success stories because they might be useful for another colleague. Or where you've tried something and it hasn't worked, also go, well, that's actually a learning too. And so as we keep doing good job design and good management practices within different agencies, it's all part of that journey.
Couldn't agree more. Comment I often make in my own workplace is this is how it is now. We've just got to get good at it. And we get good at it by trying different things, by sharing experiences. Yeah. So Gordon, another one that was mentioned on the way through, and I think this has been a major selling point in the agreements and for a lot of agencies, the changes that were in the common conditions around parental leave, but then what do we think is going to come next in terms of maternity leave, the Maternity Leave Act and the review and the findings?
Yeah, so that's a big step around the parental leave arrangements, and that's one of the major conditions or common conditions. Just how it evolves in practice, I feel that's really a matter for the government and the minister at this stage, and so I can't feel difficult to preempt or talk about some of those specific elements. I would say that it's very much on people's minds and what those steps would be, and they will be part of them in further discussion and negotiation. I'd be interested in where people see what matters to them in their lives and in their choices, what really has an impact there. I would think that at some stage, we're talking about parental leave arrangements, of moving from the language about maternity leave arrangements. It's a 50-year-old act. And so making that a bit more contemporary, like the Minister was talking about with elements of the public service, I think that's...
the title of the Act itself.
Yeah, no, that's right. But I don't know whether my colleagues might have elements that they see actually really matter to people in their departments.
The Minister for Women is about to release the National Strategy on Gender Equality. And one of the underlying, or one of the foundations of the document is really about harmful gender norms and stereotypes that really play out in terms of how women experience gender equality. So one of the things that the strategy does do is look at how do we value both paid and unpaid care, and how do we encourage more men to take up opportunities around caring for children. Because while it is a strategy that is largely focused on women, because it recognises that historically women haven't fared as well in the equality project, it also recognises that gender equality is in fact good for all of us. The benefits that men get from spending time with their children are enormous. I couldn't be doing the job I do without having a male partner who spent a lot of time with my kids. I've had big jobs for a lot of my life, but he's got so much out of it. And my two daughters are confident young women, I think, because they've had a very different role model in their father. And I think it's a really important thing for us to be encouraging and talking about more. Alison?
Yeah.
From DVA's perspective, I think it's a combination of the two questions actually about flexible work and maternity leave provisions that gave rise to the specific question. What is evident in DVA is that staff really value that flexibility. You know, it gives them that freedom to manage their family and other commitments in a way that can enable different decisions and different parents to lean in at certain periods of time. So that's come out really strongly, that flexibility, that hybrid working approach that we have at the moment in DVA is highly valued by our staff. And so we're putting a lot of effort into how do we get the best out of that? Because, it's here to stay. I agree with you. It's very much here to stay, but we have to optimise it. And for me, my focus is on making sure that the time in the office is of maximum value. So we're putting a lot of effort into professional development programs, events, things that are in the office, in each of our offices in the States, with our deputy commissioners leading that work, to make sure that there's a real program and a focus on optimising that time in the office, optimising that connection with colleagues that's so critical to the support, feeling supported in your job. If your job is talking to veterans, with claims processing for hours a day, a lot of that is not actually pleasant. That might get quite tense. And you want to be able to spend time with colleagues, talking to them about that, debriefing. You want to be supported in how you manage that yourself. And we want to make sure that when you're in the office with your colleagues talking about that, there's a lot of time to get the maximum impact from that best equips you to go home and have those days at home as well, and still feel that your psychosocial wellbeing is being, actively managed and supported from the workplace. So that's where we're putting a lot of our efforts in DVA, getting the best out of the office time, with the recognition that the flexibility will exist going forward.
Yeah. All right, so we've got a bit of a different question that's come through, and it's about the place of technical roles in the APS. So we have a whole range of them, obviously, and the nature of technical roles that we've historically had in terms of classifications, like, my department, health, we've got medical officers, we've got Commonwealth nursing officers, things like that. But it's really changing in terms of some of the technical capabilities that the service needs. And we do struggle to compete on a pay basis with the private sector in terms of a lot of these technical capabilities. What's the sort of vision for that in terms of how we can value that technical skill and you don't have to move into being a generalist manager in order to have a career growth in the public service?
So this is a really live topic in many different dimensions. So technical know-how or substance or expertise in general is really, really important, and it's often a part of doing your job. Actually, you bring some substance of the subject matter expertise or knowledge to your job. I think that's a general feature that people look at, and how do we support that building of capability around that? I think it comes down, the rubber hits the road very specifically on technical skills and the role of specialists within the service. And I think we're working through actually what that means, and have a lot of discussions at Secretary's Board on this topic. Part of it is that those technical skills and specialist skills are really important, but we should be very clear about what is a specialist and what's not, and then how do we reward that, and how do we enable that career a person to have that career, because it is part of, we're big enough to be diverse enough to take quite a lot of different kind of job roles. And how do we ensure that people have a sense of being valued and they can contribute, but they also have a career within that? So that's very much on our minds. It's also then generally about how do we build up expertise, including technical knowledge. But that can be in different areas too. And we're leaning in a lot more now, I think, on procurement, contract management, project management. These are some of the basics of public administration, but there are also skills that are also important in that. So I think it's a really live topic, and it's one that I think you're just going to hear a lot about. You're going to hear a lot about. Yeah.
So you did promise to answer some hard questions, Minister, so the audience has got one for you. When will ministers be held accountable to APS values? Behaviour during Senate estimates is often unprofessional and rude.
I will start by saying I'm not a senator. And obviously, Senate estimates is a process that's not just the minister at the table, but a number of members of parliament or backbench senators or non-government senators asking questions. And so that We've got sort of questions about parliamentarian conduct, questions about minister conduct, and there are 2 separate camps there. But let me just go through this in a few steps. One, I think it is a mistake in any democracy to conflate public servants who serve governments of any persuasion chosen by the people with the politically elected ministers who oversee those departments. That separation is really important. And so I don't want us to go down a path where everything applies in exactly the same way, because we've got to recognise that one comes with a democratic mandate and one comes with a, both, civil servants are under the Constitution. Your positions exist through a constitutional recognition. Once upon a time, you were all appointed by the Governor-General personally. I don't think you could do it 170,000 a year, and also through legislative instruments. So that separation is important. There are some things that oversee us as ministers, and I'll talk specifically about ministers because there is a parliamentary code of conduct that goes to all members of parliament. But for ministers, it's the ministerial code of conduct. That's really clear, and the Prime Minister, when he was elected, strengthened that code of conduct. It's very clear about treating public servants with courtesy and respect. That's there. Simple as that. That's the expectation of the Prime Minister and myself. But that's not to say that you won't get good, accountable, robust democratic debate at Senate estimates. It's there for a reason, and we all know that one of the reasons it's there is not just to answer the questions that are asked, but to make sure that that principle of democratic accountability is in everything the public service does and in everything that a minister does. And I think that's really important. So I recognise that the simple answer would be take these values here, apply them over there. I think we'd cross the line in doing that, but there is a very strong code of conduct. It's online for any of you to see. I'm sure that's why everyone's looking at their phones right now. You're just rushing to see it. But it's there, and you can see that code of conduct, what is expected of us and the accountability that's expected of every single minister in the government. And I think that gives you a pretty good sense of the sort of behaviour we expect from ministers, not just in front of the cameras at Senate estimates, but throughout all of their work for the Australian public.
Thank you. So here's one. I'm not sure any of you are in a position to give the full answer, but we'd love your insights anyway. The audience are interested. When will the government invest in proper IT infrastructure across the service to enable it to be more efficient and to collaborate fully? When I hear a question like this, I reflect on where we were pre-pandemic and where we are now, and how, here's my desktop I carry around with me and it works wherever I go, and that has completely changed the way we work. But, you compare that to how we operate with other aspects of our life and the IT that's there. Any insights people want to share? I remember starting in the service with no computer on my desk as well. So.
It's a spending question, so I'll go first. I think there has been a real uplift, as you say, but there's always people trying to sell government products. I mean, those of you who work in procurement will know that there's always just one more product, one more bit of software or one more device, and then all your problems in your agency will be solved. It doesn't quite work like that, and obviously we're balancing that desire to give people, I talk about a public service that has the capability to do its job well. That means having the ICT, and I always want to have the most effective. I hate ICT being the roadblock for me being able to do any work. I mean, I sign all of my ministerial briefs on my iPad. I don't print out any of that stuff. I've tried to build those new ways of working, and I get really frustrated, like this questioner and probably most people in this room, when something doesn't work. But I also recognise that we live in a world where the security of the information that we hold is really important, and that comes with a need to move more cautiously and slowly at times, because the frustration you might feel of having to print out a brief or do this or do that in a way that isn't very efficient is nothing compared to the frustration the public that we serve feel if, and I think about Alison, all the data that you hold in your agency. Obviously, we want to make sure that all of that is 100% secure as we try and give people the tools they need to do their job well. But I share some of the frustrations behind this question, and I think everyone, if we were to go around the room, would have a perfect example of somewhere where, with just a small spend, we could make a huge difference.
Does anyone want to add anything? Or
Just from DVA's perspective, I think we are focusing on where can those small spends make the biggest difference, as the Minister said, because I think there's also a public exhaustion with big investments in ICT infrastructure. You know, in DVA, the veteran groups will say, well, when are you going to stop spending money on ICT systems? And you still tell us that they're rubbish. You know, we're how many years along and you're still saying that there's big challenges with them and they're not connected. And that is true. And these investments have gone into it and things are better than they were. So that's your point as well, Rachel, at the beginning. It is improved, but it's not state of the art in its connectedness and its capability. And I think we just need to bring our constituent groups along with us as well in departments around why that ICT investment is indeed the best expenditure for, you know, scarce government resources and what it's going to deliver to them. And that's making that really strong argument as in helping staff to do their jobs that's going to benefit you as a citizen.
so a question there for you, Gordon. Do you think the continuation of ministerial appointed secretaries is conducive to frank and fearless advice and sound evidence-based policy development? Another tricky one.
Thank you for the question. This often comes up, and the question is, well, frankly, if you just had actually secretaries were just independent and not appointed by the Prime Minister or had fixed terms, then none of these problems of integrity or poor advice would occur. And I don't think that's true, and for a number of reasons. I'm not saying it's not an issue, but it's not the driver. It's really, I think, fundamentally around culture and behaviour and the personal attributes of leaders. That's actually more important. And I've known many secretaries over the years, and some of them actually have been dismissed, but have always had the view that I will provide my best advice to the government and I'll do that the way I is best for me, but I will do that because that's my job and that's my values. It's my values, and that matters to me. So I really don't think people fabricate their advice so that they can stay in the job. I've just never seen that, and people don't do it. And I have tested, you know, over time in my departments to see if people do that, and generally they don't. So I think it comes back, it's more about your integrity, what your values are. That's the driver of how you engage. There are not to say that there can't be people who are looking for self-advancement, and how do they do that? That's another element of character, and that's part of the selection process. But it's not the primary driver of do people give frank and fearless advice to a minister. And when it comes to secretaries, I think there's a very particular role and a set of responsibilities there, and people. My experience is that that's taken very seriously by people. On the other hand, when you look at who they're advising ministers. Ministers can lose their jobs very easily, actually, at the hands of the electorate, usually. And I've worked for many ministers who that's happened to, so you see that. And secretaries but that's part of the reality, and we shouldn't be removed from that. I don't think we're still very professional. Public servants are very professional. And they get paid very well. Secretaries get paid very well. And there's a risk premium built into that. That's part of why their salaries are is that it's an explicit compensation for that risk. But I think it's the primary thing of actually culture and behaviour and values. And that's where the primary element of the APS reform at the start, that's why we were talking about stewardship. Because actually you are the system and you're part of the system. Your values matter and the public service values matter. And that's the driver of people's behaviour.
Can I add three things on that? When I came into government, the person at the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet offered to me to help as an interim departmental liaison officer was someone who had done that very job for a previous Liberal government minister. And I welcomed that person into my office and they did an incredible job. And it was 100% the right decision, but also a demonstration that, we talk about secretaries at one level, but actually throughout the entire public service, there are people who just rock up every day to do their job professionally, regardless of who the Australian people or the Prime Minister of the day has chosen to hold a particular portfolio. I just wanted to sort of share that as one small example of this, not just being something at the top, but being something that's actually throughout the ethos of the public service. The second is in the Public Service Reform Bill that we put through Parliament last year. One of the things was actually a clarification that outside of departmental secretaries, ministers don't have the power to sort of direct an agency who to appoint throughout the organisation. And while that's the practice, we made that much clearer. And the third is we did have a discussion about whether or not there should be a parliamentary confirmation process for departmental secretaries. I'm very happy to say you can look on the record of the consideration in detail in the third reading debate. I argued against that. And the reason being that actually if you look at where that does happen, you'd actually, in my view, find that you'd probably end up with more politicisation because you are trying to shepherd someone through a process through two chambers of Parliament and a United States-style Senate confirmation process. And I'm not convinced that that would actually give you the frank, fearless public service advice that you need at that most senior level. I think these are conversations we should have and we should continue. I welcome whoever chose to ask the question, but I'm not sure that going to a more parliamentary confirmation style process would somehow depoliticise it. I actually think you would head in the other direction.
So we're back onto the topic of flexible work, and I know this was considered as part of APS-wide bargaining, but it's the question about the 100-80-100 4-day work week. So the idea that you do 100% of your work and 100% of your hours in 4 days. Oh, sorry, you get 100% of your work, 100% of your pay, but a 4-day week, 80% of your time. And it was raised as an idea during the bargaining process, and at that time the public service felt that we probably weren't the right employer to really dive into that in Australia at that time. Do you think that's something that might come in the future? Do you think it's something that's still going to be considered one day?
So you're all very welcome to take this question. So the 4-day work week does come up. People talk about it, and so it's a reality, and it's part of a community conversation. I think for the instance that we've faced more recently of what matters for the public service, I think of in this enterprise agreement was locking down actually what the arrangements are around flexible work. And actually flexible work can take you an awful long way to these things. And having a whole service-wide structure around that and be very clear that it's a system that's built on the institution's needs, on the team's needs and the individual's needs. They're really, really important. And the government was very clear that it had to be an issue that was negotiated in the workplace rather than a diktat imposed on people. And that was very clear government's preference around that. So let's lock those things in. Let's digest that enterprise agreement and actually what it means in practice. There's a lot to tease out with flexible work because if it has to happen through a negotiation in the workplace, it'll uncover different things, and what we'll see is the degree of consistency between different kinds of work, even within an institution, between institutions that do similar kind of work as well, and how that works and how do we understand that. And there'll be all sorts of feedback on that. So locking that down actually is a big thing, and I think we've got a lot there. But the 4-day week is something that people talk about, and that's an issue for future negotiations. But you can get, frankly, a lot of things from the current structure.
Yeah, certainly as one of the agencies who went through bargaining fairly early and got our agreement voted up before Christmas. We're now coming out the other end of all the practical implementation issues of changing payroll systems and delegations and all of those sorts of things. And now I think the challenge is the cultural shift in terms of there is a lot, as you said, in those conditions, and it's how do we really embrace that as a service? How do we see that as the sort of the practice across the service in a way that supports us to do our best and for people to be able to do that in a flexible way and to be able to balance work and the rest of their lives.
You don't mind if I pop in on again? I don't want to go back to this, but understanding what it means for teams and for institutions is really important. If you learn a lot on the job by seeing what other people are doing and engaging with them, and it's the learning by seeing and doing, sometimes you can't do that digitally, or it's harder. So how do we really ensure that people who are coming into institutions understand actually what's good practice, what's culture, how do we deal with work health and safety in a different kind of workplace? All of those, they're really big things to work through.
Does anyone else want to add what changes you're sort of seeing locally?
I think
you talked about the reasons to come in and making the most of when people come in.
Yeah, and it goes to Gordon's point exactly about, what the maximum benefit from team, being in a team as well, and we don't want to lose that. We want to get the benefits of flexible work and not lose the benefits of knowing your team members and working well with them and supporting each other.
And particularly when there's new team members coming in, making sure that they can become part of that team in a real way. Yeah. So we've got a question next about the brain drain from the APS over the last 15 years has been immense. How do we encourage the right people back into the APS? So any thoughts? I think by being an awesome workplace, but that's just me.
I mean, I'd like to think, I'm sure Gordon would like to think this too, that over the last few years there has been a focus on being more flexible to bring more people and expertise into the APS that might not otherwise have been contemplated as willingly in the past. So I hope that people could see some signs of that, and that's certainly evident even in terms of a willingness to engage people from different places in the country and not requiring everyone to be based in Canberra. I'm a very good example of that. I mean, I'm here every week, but I reside, my home base is in Sydney. So I think there are ways that we can demonstrate that innovation and flexibility in our own models to bring in people and say, we can work with you, that even with the intelligence, the big investment in intelligence services, there's a concentration in places. There will be big recruitments outside of Canberra. Again, recognising not everyone wants to come to Canberra or needs to come to Canberra to do that work. And those kind of workforces you're wanting to draw on will be elsewhere in the country. So I think that, we've taken some steps towards that. It's just about continuing to do that, always building that out and contemplating what's next. Padma might have some thoughts.
I'm the same as Alison. I wouldn't have taken this job if it was based completely in Canberra. I've got a daughter doing her HSC this year, so although it's quite nice being away from her, but
hope she's not watching.
She's not watching, don't worry. She's 17. I think that the idea of all jobs being able to be done flexibly and the idea that you can attract talent from places apart from Canberra. I mean, Canberra's got an amazing educated population, but once you open that up, the opportunities are endless. And I think it is really important to have people who don't necessarily come from the public service coming in. I mean, I'm still learning the language, but I know how useful it has been for me to ask what you might all think of as quite dumb questions, but when we're thinking about serving the Australian people, we need to be able to answer those questions. You need to be able to tell people why our processes are the way they are. And I think when you've been in the service for a long time, it becomes habit. It doesn't become, you don't think through, why are we doing this in this way? And it's been really interesting when you think about women and gender. The Office for Women's has done a great job of being good bureaucrats. So, they comment on proposals as they come in, as they go through the process. But if we really want to make an impact, if we really want to change the way gender equality looks in this country, you have to start at the beginning of a policy idea, not once it's become a proposal. So, someone like me coming in can say, it's no use well, it's of some use, commenting on Greens and the rest of it. But really, what we need to be doing is influencing people to be thinking about gender much earlier. And so I think that bringing that different perspective in, I hope my colleagues agree with that, is a useful thing, even just to shake us out of our comfort zone, which I think is a very important thing to do.
So we've got another slightly tricky question here, I think. So the question from the audience is, SES are promoted without proven decision-making and people management capability. Now, as someone who's chaired a lot of SES panels, I would like to think that's not always true. Please outline the plans to make SES in agencies with cultural issues accountable. And you talked a little bit already about the sort of work around SES performance framework and where that's going. Anyone want to talk a little bit more about what they're seeing and the changes they're starting to see? What we're starting to implement?
I could say something from DVA. Gordon might have more to add from his perspective. One thing we're doing in DVA, and again, I agree with you that that's not always true. In fact, I can't think of too many instances, but I'm sure there would, people speak from experience and what they've observed. Yeah. I think when you're looking at cultural issues, particularly, when it's DVA, if there's a distrust in the community, you need to demonstrate that the assessment of culture is not just from within the agency itself. So saying to the constituency, it's all good, there's no problem, that would likely not be trusted as much if that assessment was internally generated. So what we've done in DVA is get some independent assessment of culture where a culture in a big area of the department has been consistently raised as an issue, and get someone to independently devise the questions at a university, devise the questions and then do the analysis of the results, which has demonstrated to us that there is not the kind of problem that was perceived externally, but I think we'll have a lot more traction with the community and does hold those managers, it is not only about making those managers accountable, it's also recognising that they were doing putting in enormous efforts and doing a job that wasn't being recognised, that was constantly being perceived as not achieving a cultural shift. So I think you have to think a bit creatively sometimes. How can we support the managers who were trying to do that work and demonstrate that it takes something additional than just an internal assessment to say, no, we are scrutinising ourselves, we are making ourselves accountable, we are independently assessing culture and identifying if there are issues that need to be remedied. And those things do always show you things that need to be improved. Yeah. It's never, it's all good, you're set. It's always giving you things that need to be further developed. But that's just one example of how we've tried to both support the SES and also give them what they need, but also subject ourselves to that scrutiny around culture in DVA.
Yeah, and I certainly look forward to the day we get our census results each year. It's a bit like more like my kids look forward to Christmas. Like, as a bit of a data nerd from way back, I love that data coming in, not just because of what it says at the agency level, but the way you can use that data to identify who might need some more support, to identify where you've got some potential issues and risks in your organisation. And I think that is part of the agenda around transparency and the use of that and the broader sort of focus on 360s for SES officers and all of those sorts of things to make sure that we are supporting people to be successful in their jobs, but yes, holding them to account when they're not living up to the expectations. As you said, Minister, the how and the what and the how is equally important.
One of the advantages of being a bit older is that I can remember the past. And previously with staff census results, when I was a secretary previously, you'd get it in a brown paper envelope at Secretary's Board. It was very embarrassing. People really guarded it, really sealed envelopes. And it was your discretion as to what you shared with your department. So just imagine the world we're in now. Actually, it's not. It's on the website. Everyone's up there, and it's everyone to see. Where will we go on these things? I think that's phenomenal. So the transparency shift is different, and people talk about it all the time. And you look at how this thing is tracked, even in the past several years, more and more is coming out around that. including comparators. So we couldn't do that a few years ago. We couldn't have comparators. So we've got that now. Where will we be in 5 years' time on this?
Exactly.
Frankly, big data and data analytics can tell you an awful lot around census results, also with the APS employment database, but you can get an awful lot of information that actually big data techniques can be really useful to underpin, and they're meant to be tools to help people, not meant to be things to penalise or gotcha moments, not that sort of thing, to understand organisations and how they're working and what works and what doesn't. I think on the performance management system that we talked about with SES, and we're talking about SES there because in a workforce of 170,000, that 3,000 group really matters to setting the tone for everything. Now we're going to start using, we're saying outcomes and behaviours both matter. And then over time, as you get confidence in that it's working, performance assessments are accurate, they're really relying on the 360, they become the vehicle by which that's an important input into promotions. Staff census results become a bit of that now as well. So more and more you can gather more information to really make good calls. So I think that question's great, actually, that we've got to hold our feet to the fire on this.
Yeah. You want to add something?
I was just going to say on the SES, I think the other thing that adds to all of those answers is we also have an obligation to ensure that we're investing in people who are put into those positions. One of the great things about an APS career is that there should be ongoing investment in your development and your skills. We don't expect that when people come into the APS, they know how to do everything that they're going to do over the course of that career. One of the things I share with public servants is I went to a course last year for sort of new ministers. I did that for a week through the McKinnon Leadership Institute. That was a fantastic experience. If I can find a week to do that, then of course people who are elevated into the SES can also find those opportunities to work on the skill gaps that they might have, and we've all got them. That's okay. Like, we don't need to pretend that, oh, I've got this new title, I know how to do everything perfectly, and I don't need to learn a thing more. We actually need to keep investing in our people. I spoke at the APS Academy, SES Band 2 and 3 programs, which are about, again, building that leadership and management skill set for people who've gone into the SES. They're really good programs. If that's something that and I'd encourage you to have the confidence. They're programs that we run, well, Gordon and his team run. If you see an SES manager who's struggling, maybe it's not you to go and suggest that to them, but maybe you can get one of their colleagues at a similar level to suggest it. Or maybe actually you'll suggest it to them and they'll go, you know what, you're right, I do need to go and build that time into my schedule to go and do that piece of training, because that is just a key part of what we need to do, which is to constantly invest in our people and constantly encourage that learning mindset.
So on that theme of investing in our people, the next question is about what we're doing to reduce burnout of APS staff. And I know I've been in the health department for a while. This was a very real issue over the last few years. 2020, 2021, 2022 were very tough years for the whole public service, but I can certainly say for the health department it was tough. And there was the need for some really conscious resetting of what people were thinking of as normal. We'd all gotten into some fairly weird work patterns to deal with being trapped at home or the demands of the pandemic or whatever it might be. And I think burnout is very real, and that's probably still the case. And certainly there are always different parts of the service that are under enormous pressure. So how do we manage that going forward? How are we looking after that well-being of our people?
I'll jump in because they'll give everyone else time to come up with better answers than one that I'm going to start with. But I think in terms of what government has done, recognising that this was a challenge, is we have invested significantly in expanding the public service, recognising that there were agencies and parts of the public service who were struggling. And these are the numbers. We grew, in the last financial year, we grew the public service by 6.9%. That's the percentage. That's 11,000 additional people in the public service. In large part, because we knew that this was a problem, and we also knew that on the other side of that burnout was the fact that the public weren't getting the services and work from the public service that they needed, which was causing a range of other stresses for people who were waiting for a response from a service delivery agency. So that was the big thing. There's a lot of other pieces in the management side and that can be done, but that was the big thing that government did to acknowledge that we needed to take some responsibility for this challenge, and indeed we found the resources to make sure we could get those 11,000 people into the public service to help, where possible, with some of these challenges.
Can I just add to that, further to what the Minister said? We're a department that's benefited from that, and I think it has made the single biggest difference to burnout experienced by staff, because they were under such pressure. You know, claim rates and demands on the system were well in excess of what the department was able to respond to in a plausible and acceptable time frame, and that just increases pressure. That goes to what I said earlier as well. People want to do a good job and they want to feel like they're doing a good job, and that affects people's morale. The burnout affects how they feel about their job as well. But what the next step now in DVA, so we've got additional resources, it's making a real difference. The next step for us is we set up a group after the census showed last year that it was still an issue. It's not gone, it's still an issue. Set up a working group where staff volunteered to be on that, led by a Band 1, and they're reporting back to the Executive Management Board in the next month actually about what else can we do, because we want a lot of those ideas. We're doing our own things. Like I said, we're doing professional development in different offices and are giving staff a real program and, you know, demonstrating what we're doing as a department to try and support them better. But I want a lot of that to be driven by what people think would make a difference to them as well with burnout. So that's something that I'm looking forward to in the next month.
So burnout features quite strongly in the census results, so people can see what that means. My personal guess would be the service still hasn't recovered from COVID. It was a lot of effort, lots of things, and then we're seeing the aftershocks, I think, of that in terms of people's resilience and their well-being. But it is something that's really, really important for workplaces to talk about. So I think part of the response, and it's only part, but the other things that the Minister and Alison talked about, when people have a good sense of, you can change things, you can do things different. So your work practices really matter. And probably that comes down to prioritisation is really the thing that the people raise with me. We have to be really clear about priorities. And I think we struggle with that. Yeah. We struggle with dropping things and how do we shift resources in a big way. So that's probably the big, I mean, that's a real thing. The positive element to it is that people find energy and resilience in a strong sense of self-worth and a strong sense of purpose. And I think being able to say to public servants, you do a great job and thank you, and that we recognise that and we acknowledge that part of it helps. It's not everything, but it's part of it. And actually people feeling that they're doing something, that they can see an impact of their work in something that matters to them and which is, you know, for the public and government, the nature of our institutions, that also helps. So taking out some of the silliness or the silly stuff in our processes can also help, because you can go more directly to what's your impact on people's lives.
As we saw from the video, it's the impact on people's lives is what keeps everybody coming back year after year. So turning then to another sort of hot topic across the public service, and that's the one of integrity, and we've talked a little bit about that already. So obviously there has been, it's been confronting in terms of some of the challenges for the public service with robo-debt, some of the arrangements with consultants, what's recently happened in Home Affairs, you know, has sort of challenged, I guess, the public's perspective of integrity in the public service. From someone inside, and particularly the role I get to have in our department, I know this is something that is a really high priority for government and for the service. How are you seeing that play out sort of in your roles?
I think the best thing about this, I don't know, I actually can't see the screen. I don't know if you can see the question, but the start of this question is, how do we collectively repair? And I think that's just such a great way to start what is a really difficult policy area, which is that it's not something where everyone says, oh, government's got to fix it, or the commissioner has to fix it, or a particular secretary has to fix it. It's something that we all have a role to play in. What do? I actually think you have to show people that you have learnt those lessons. I saw, like, one of the things I think is a really great lesson out of the Robodebt Royal Commission inquiry is it recommends that people spend more time in those agencies doing frontline work to really understand the impacts of policy decisions. Now, that's not mandated for every one of the 104 public sector agencies, but it doesn't mean that you can't. It doesn't mean that you can't take some of those lessons and think more about, well, what does this agency look like on the front line? That's one of the things I try and do, is go and talk and sit with frontline workers in different agencies in the public service. I mentioned out at the National Disability Insurance Agency yesterday, talking to people who do planning meetings. You just learn so much sitting with people and seeing the different parts of the public service, particularly frontline parts of the public service, in action. The other piece is, and I do, again, if you think about some of those reports, there's often also really good examples of people following and demonstrating the public service values, and indeed the Roadshow Royal Commission report. There is wrongdoing in that report, but there's also people who are doing the right thing. And I also always, whenever we talk about these difficult areas, try and point out that actually there's a lot of things to be proud of in how the public service collectively conducts itself, even where there are also things that we seriously need to address. And I'll just finish on sort of saying that's actually about showing to the Australian public at large that sort of the democratic, it's not that good an answer, that the democratic process works, that where things go wrong, the system responds, uplifts its outcomes, that that democratic accountability, even when it's in those hardest of areas, that accountability delivers a better outcome over time, and that we do indeed, where we get those very confronting reports, that we do take action.
I think that summarises well, learning the lessons and actually taking action in response. Anyone want to add anything on that? Or?
So the only thing I'd add is that, so again, really good question. It comes up a lot in conversations with people. I think actually what's striking is when public servants raise it, they really do want integrity. They want it. And it's the overwhelming response of, this matters to us. It really matters to us. And I find that very inspiring, because that says, we have these things happen, and sometimes there are systemic elements to the problems that we can see, not denying that, but actually the vast bulk of public servants want integrity, and they value that honesty and fairness. So that says something very positive, I think, around the public service.
I'm just going to say this, which is I've had fantastic advice from the public service on so many things over recent years, but I've never been given good advice on how to do what I need to do now, which is to walk out of a panel on which I am on so I can go and catch a plane. So I'm just going to embrace the awkwardness of that. Obviously, we have ASEAN being hosted in Melbourne, and I've got to get back there for some important events this evening with our guests. So if I can finish by saying this, and you can keep the conversation going in my absence. Firstly, thank you to everyone from the APSC who put on today's event and all of the events as part of the State of the Service Roadshow and the report and data that underpins it. Thanks to our friends at QT. Thanks to the sound techs who I think have a similar experience to many in the public service, which is you only notice when something's going wrong and you don't notice when something's going right. And thank you very much for taking the time out of your days, as we've covered today. You're all under huge pressure. You've made a decision to come here today because you recognise that these sort of dialogues make a big difference in terms of government leaders within the public service hearing about what you want as the core of the public service. Rachel, thank you very much for hosting us.
Pleasure.
And thank you again to everyone who's joined us online. It makes a real difference.
Thanks to you for attending.
Sorry.
Thank you. We do have a few more minutes left, so I've got a couple more questions. If anyone's still got any, please send them through. So the next one we've got, it comes back to a theme that we had before around technical expertise. And this is from, it says, they're a junior employee. I've worked under a series of managers who are great technical experts with no people and management skills. How can we address this gap? And the public service is constantly working to address this gap. I've got to say, I think some of the offerings we have through the academy and things at the moment are probably some of the best we've had over time. But a lot of it does come back to what's happening locally in terms of that commitment to development at all levels, in terms of the skills people need to do their jobs. Is there something you think we've missed or something we need to experiment with doing a bit differently?
Well, I think the fact that people here laughed when they heard you say the question tells you we've got something real, and it's a real issue, but it's something we try to grapple with, and I think the services continually just think about my own 40 years of what I've seen, always trying to grapple with that and come to grips with it, and so we're not there. I guess is the point. There are systems, so. Really are trying and encouraging. I think this is where the digital side offers a particular opportunity. You can lean in for the EL1 and the EL2 management programs that are around. You can really lean in much more directly to an individual. If you've got 13,000 EL2s, 30,000 ELs or more, how do you have a system that reaches into all of those individuals? Well, you can hope that actually the priorities, the incentives are there for them to do it, that we say that it's important, that their own managers do that. So especially the SES are really good at people managers, and they're not, but getting there. So I think it's leaning into those sorts of systems and using them. But I think there are more of them now than there used to be.
And I think this ties back to the conversations we had about burnout and the conversations we had, in terms of resetting after the pandemic, and the importance of us finding that time to invest in our development.
Yeah.
That we have to keep learning and growing, and people need to get that feedback about where they need to learn and grow, and to be able to be supported to go on that. Because I think there was a period where a lot of people literally didn't have time. You were learning a lot, but it was all on the job through the pandemic. So I think it is interesting to see how we reinvest in that and grow those capabilities. Any other thoughts from your perspectives?
It just reminded me that when I was in Centrelink years ago, I had one of the psychologists there said to me, I really hate that they're called soft skills, your people skills and the way you communicate. She said, because it's actually the hardest stuff. It's not, it's a misnomer in that respect. And I think it's just to acknowledge, it always stuck with me when she said that. She said it's so, it's not construed appropriately and it doesn't reflect how difficult it is. And I think there's a lot of training and support available to everyone that seeks to recognise that. And I think there's also a need for people to actively source and seek their own mentors and people whose approaches they like and have they benefited from and think they want to emulate that. I spoke to a group of new Band 1s in Defence last week, and I think there's a need also to be really candid. And I said to them, it's not easy, and you watch from afar and you think it's easy. So when I became a Band 1, I thought, that can't be too difficult to do. And you watch people do poorly and you think, I'm sure I could do better at those things. And then when you're in that position, it's actually quite a different perspective, I think. And I was just acknowledging that it was a steep learning curve, and it's one that I'm still on. That was what I also said to them. It never ends. And I said I'm more comfortable with things, but that I'm probably better at doing some things, but there's still so many aspects that you learn through experience, and you just have to keep seeking that support, those opportunities for growth and training and development. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us to keep working on that one.
And the next question we've got goes back to our conversation about the APS-wide bargaining. What's the timetable for getting pay equity across the department? So we've obviously made a big step in that direction through the current the round of bargaining and the current round of enterprise agreements. What's the sort of forward projection, do you think? Will we see similar changes in 3 years' time?
Well, that'll be part of that bargaining. So I thought this one signalled the disparity in wages went from 27 to about 13% across the service. So that's a big first step. That step relatively easy in terms of the budget cost because it was the smaller agencies that were really penalised, and some of those were First Nations agencies.
Yep.
So that's easier in the sense of the budget impact. If you want to go to full no difference, very expensive. And so that's really got to be how would we go about that? But that's an issue, frankly, for the future. But it's one that people raise. It's also, I reckon, we need to have a conversation around what's the right level of what's a good level of disparity. Doesn't have to be everything's the same. I mean that's I think a qualitative. There's a policy discussion to be had about what's actually a good dispersion.
And we've got one last question. I'll ask each of you to answer this one. What do you think is the biggest change we will see to roles and jobs of the public servants by 2035? 10 years out, or 11 years out. We've only just started this year.
Who do you want to start with? Well, I mean, I'll start. I would like to see, this isn't about, I mean, obviously our roles will change with technology and those sorts of things, but in terms of the APS, I think a big change in the next 10 years would be to see greater diversity in our leadership. I think there's still we're doing well with gender, but we're not doing so well on other metrics of, and that, you know, the huge response I got to when I was appointed to this role from people from migrant and refugee backgrounds and First Nations people said something to me. It said it wasn't just it was symbolically really important for people to see someone in a leadership role so that they could see themselves in leadership. So what I would love to see is a big change in that.
From my perspective, I think there's enormous potential, obviously, with technology and specifically AI to change the nature of some of the jobs in a department like DVA. But the exciting part of that is that I want to see all that capacity that's freed up focused on the aspects of the work that need human intervention and
soft skills.
Yes, that's right. that need that connection, and we have a lot of coordinated client support, a lot of human interaction in DVA, and that need will never go. That's what veterans value, and that's what can offer enormous benefit, and that's who we're there to serve. So I just want to make sure that, with technological advancements, that capacity is focused on getting even more value from those interactions, and that's what our staff do every day.
So for me, ultimately it's the purpose of what our jobs are, and that is the Australian people and our natural world, and we're custodians of that. And the complexity of what's in people's lives is real, and technology and capability and empathy are ways to reach into that complexity and have a profound impact on people's lives and on our natural world. So I think the biggest change is actually we've got the tools to grasp with that complexity through technology, capability and empathy.
So that is a fantastic way for us to finish today. I'm afraid we're out of time. Please thank me in thanking our panellists. So for Gordon, Alison and Padma, and of course the Minister who ducked out a little bit early. And I'd like to thank everybody here and online for watching and for contributing. It's made a great discussion having everybody's questions fed through, so thank you very much for that. There are a couple more legs to the Roadshow to go, but if you want, in the meanwhile, some more insights on the key themes discussed today, you can check out the State of the Service report, which is on the Commission's website, and keep an eye out for a follow-up email from today where there will be some answers to questions that we weren't able to get to. Oh, there's one we prepared earlier. Thanks, Gordon. So the Roadshow is on the road, so heading to Newcastle and Townsville. So I hope those events are as well attended and get some great questions like we did here today. Thank you again for everybody, for those who have helped organise the event, and for those who are here in the room with us, please hang around and join us for a networking afternoon tea. Thanks again.